Young people like yourself are being placed on these drugs knowing very little about them, which is so dangerous. Everybody has the right to learn about the potential harms of these drugs as well as the benefits of these drugs, which is something that is really not happening at the moment. After 12 years of research, I probably wouldn't choose to take an antidepressant.
Now then, welcome to Reconnect, the podcast for people who want to heal and grow from life's tough times. I'm Joe Tudor, the founder of the Reconnect Club and a mental health keynote speaker. Today I'm chatting with Beverly Thomson, who's a writer, researcher and speaker with a focus on psychiatric medication. We'll be talking about why we need to be better informed on psychiatric medication, the hidden harms of antidepressants, and most importantly, how to make your own decision. To be honest, I've been anxious about releasing this episode because I had a difficult experience with antidepressants. I want to be clear that we talk about things that might seem shocking. If you're taking antidepressants right now and you don't want to know, or maybe you feel like you might not be able to cope without them right now, then this episode might not be right at this moment in time. So feel free to skip it and save it till later. But I think it's important to have these conversations because as you'll find out in the episode, I don't think I'm the only one to have been given misinformation by the doctor. Right, here's Beverly.
If you were to find yourself in the situation that I and millions of other people have done, sat in the GP's chair with a prescription for an antidepressant, would you take one?
Wow. That's a very difficult question for many reasons, but first of all, I'm not a doctor, so I never give medical advice. I have to say, as I always say, everyone has a right to take an antidepressant if that's what they choose to do. But everybody has the right to learn about the potential harms of these drugs as well as the benefits of these drugs, which is something that is really not happening at the moment. And young people like yourself are being placed on these drugs knowing very little about them, which is so dangerous. There are so many things we still don't know about these drugs. I have to say that after 12 years of research, I probably wouldn't choose to take an antidepressant.
That's powerful given the work you've done over the last 12 years, but also I need to be open. People, this is the first episode of the series that they listen to. I've taken an antidepressant too for 4 months and I had a really difficult experience, but I've got mates that swear by them, you know, that have taken them and they kind of act like they couldn't do without them. Why does it work for some and not others?
Well, first of all, we have to go back to the question, why do people take them initially? And I'm sure you will agree that many people take antidepressants because they've been led to believe that they have a chemical imbalance and that these drugs will correct their chemical imbalance. And I'm sure you have seen it in the press because it's pretty unavoidable.
I've had it. That was exactly pretty much word for word what my GP said to me. She told me that it was going to rebalance my brain because I didn't make enough serotonin.
Yeah. And there was a recent study from University College London, which has been majorly in the press recently, that is now saying that the belief, or this belief, that we have a chemical imbalance and that these drugs correct this chemical imbalance is a myth and is not based on scientific evidence.
Yeah, I saw that paper too. And I'd read other things previously, but when you see it being acknowledged around the world that what my GP told me isn't, we don't know that to be the case at all. What do we actually know about how antidepressants work?
Yeah, well, what I just said is that we know very little about how they actually work. And you asked a very important question there, which was, why do they work for some people and why do they not work for others? So let's go back to when you went to your GP, okay? So you went to your GP and you were obviously suffering in some way with some, I don't know what life condition or what circumstances you were in, but you went to your GP as most people, or your psychiatrist as most people do, but there were no biological tests such as blood tests or brain scans that were used to diagnose your medical condition, were there?
None. None.
Okay.
I know, and I've said in the previous episode, I wondered how could my doctor know that I had this imbalance? Like, did I not smell of enough serotonin? Was it the colour of my eyes? Like, what was it about me that made her think that my brain wasn't balanced in the right way? So you're right, there was nothing. I'd be quite happy for someone to take my blood if they wanted to.
Yeah, I think we've all been we all now believe, or we have thought that, either we have a chemical imbalance because it's a cultural belief now that people are depressed because they have a chemical imbalance, or they believe it's genetic. Their mother had it or their father had it, so they're predisposed to it. But the reality is there is actually no scientific evidence for any of this. And we've known for a long time. I think I wrote a paper back in 2014. We've known for a long time that the serotonin, the chemical imbalance is actually not based on scientific evidence.
You're right. The conclusion that one of the country's leading psychologists explained was that actually life events happen, and that's what leads us to feel that way.
That is what leads us to feel that way. And the one side of this argument, this discussion that hasn't been really talked about is, if we think that we have a chemical imbalance, but nobody can prove it, and if we think we have improved, then nobody can prove that either, can they? Because we might say we feel better and we might think these drugs are working, but just like when we first went to see a GP, there are no further tests that prove that our serotonin levels have been raised or have changed, making it that is improving our condition. So if you think about it, if you have something like high blood sugar or low blood sugar, and you have a test initially to prove that that's what's making you ill, and then when you take the medication to make it better, you then have a test when you improve to say, yes, actually, things have changed biologically. But we don't have that, do we?
No, we don't. And if we take my friends as an example, I suppose it's hard for you to talk without knowing them, but they were, and they came from a really good place in encouraging me to take antidepressants. Some of them, they kind of said the same story, that they had this chemical imbalance and, they've taken them and it's worked for them. So if we have no evidence or no test to prove that the medication worked, what else could it be?
Well, I suppose it depends on what you call improvement. And most people go to see a GP or a psychiatrist because they're having difficulty coping with something in their life. I don't know what it was for you, but most people go because there is a situation in their life that they are having trouble dealing with. And that, of course, means that you might have biological changes in your brain if you're suffering increased stress or if your mood is very low. But that's not actually the cause. The cause is what's happening in your life. So nowadays, our ability to cope with life is regarded as the state of our mental health. We hear it, we're bombarded with mental health messages on the media and in the media and everywhere in life. We talk about mental health like it's the most important thing in the world. And of course it's important, but it's important that we live a happy life, a stable life, a good life. But that's not necessarily about our mental health and our biological state when it comes to our brain. So, we've had this narrative, haven't we, for a long time that there's something wrong with me. And I really do think that a lot of people go to their GP thinking that there is something biologically wrong with them. And they think that there's something biologically wrong and the doctor can fix it with a drug. So I suppose a doctor should, in my opinion, instead of writing that prescription the minute you walk through the door and saying you're not coping with life, a doctor should wait. A doctor should wait because there are many tests which tell us that waiting is probably the best option.
And I'm guessing that there might be people in real extreme cases that are dangerous, and I'm guessing you're not saying for those people to sort of wait to go and see the doctor, but what I think you're saying for most people is that a couple of weeks, or what does the wait normally look like?
Well, the wait doesn't normally look like anything because, unfortunately, prescribing antidepressants is obviously the first option for most GPs. You are right that there are many people who are in such a state where they need medication. And as I said, I never say that people shouldn't take medication if they really need it. But medication should be an option, and there should be other options available.
I completely agree. And my experience was the way I was treated by my GP. I mean, and she was genuinely lovely and she cared. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that she genuinely thought what she was doing was right. But I'd go in there and she told me the chemical imbalance story. And she did put me on a waiting list for psychological therapies too. Yeah, I think so. She's, in her mind, she's done what she was probably taught. But the hard part was with the chemical imbalance theory and the sertraline that I was given. I thought, well, I've got this chemical imbalance and taking this pill is going to fix it. And then it didn't. And then you go back and they increase the dosage. And every time you go back, and I got to the stage where I was like, I think I was on the maximum dosage that I could be on. And I just felt worse. And I felt worse in quite a few ways. Like, just my sleep was all over the place. I found that when I experience feelings of depression, and it can go on for quite a long time, but normally it will be a few days where it's really intense, and you get moments where the clouds part, and it's those moments that I found are the ones that help me through, where it's like you can come up for breath. And it might be something positive. We've spoken about previously about basic self-care. Like, I've had those moments after a run where I'm like, oh, I think I can feel a bit, I'm not fixed and that there's anything wrong with me, but I don't feel 100%, but I feel like I'm in a better place to deal with this. When I was on antidepressants, I didn't get any of that positive, no positive emotions. So it was like the clouds never parted for me. I also found that like in my brain and in my body, it just didn't work the same. Like, I wasn't very good at football before, and I had even worse on them. But I think for me, it was that emotional numbing, the things that I now know are good for me, like seeing friends, playing football with my mates, the things that give me a sense of joy didn't give me a sense of joy. How common are these reactions?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things when we look at this study that has recently been done, which tells us that, serotonin doesn't actually cure our imbalance, we need also to be told that what actually, antidepressants don't cure our imbalance. What we need to realize is that these drugs actually create a chemical imbalance, which is one of the things that we're never really told. So these changes can cause unwanted sort of mental and physical changes. And this is so very common. If I read an extract from my book, it's from a study that was recently done. A 2018 study concluded asking people directly reveals far higher rates of adverse responses to antidepressants than previously understood, especially in the emotional, psychological, and interpersonal domains. The online survey asked antidepressant users whether they had experienced 20 adverse effects and to what degree or severity. So the survey included 1,431 people.
So that's a big amount, yeah.
From 38 countries, sorry. So I'll just read you some of the adverse effects that people said that they had. So feeling emotionally numb, 70.6%.
Wow. So what I experienced, 70% of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Feeling foggy or detached, 70%. Feeling not like myself, which is what you said, 66.2%. Sexual difficulties, 66.1%.
I don't think that gets talked about enough either.
No, and we really need to talk more about that because there are people that are really suffering. And we really need to talk more about that. Reduction in positive feelings, 60.4%. Weight gain, 60.1%. Distorted dreams, 59.2%. Withdrawal effects, 58.9%. Agitation, 58%. Insomnia, 57.7%. Caring less about others, 54.5%. And suicidality, 50.3%. It's quite grim, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I didn't know any of that. Literally, I didn't know any of that. And the sad thing is, the people that genuinely cared about me, that thought they were doing the right thing by pushing me is the wrong word to use, but encouraging me to go on them, either be it because they had their own experiences on them that we spoke about earlier, or be it because they didn't want me to suffer. I think I'd have known that, and the people around me had have known that. I would not have taken one of those. And I think it's mental that we call something that can take away all your positive emotions, your connection with others, your ability to have sex, your ability to sleep. We call it an antidepressant. Yeah, I just find that nuts. But I think the one that's given me goosebumps was the suicidality at the end that you mentioned. So what do we know about having an increase of suicidal thoughts while taking an antidepressant?
Yeah, I mean, it's been proven now that suicide and having suicidal thoughts is an adverse effect of taking antidepressants. So, I mean, the question we have to ask is here if, and I know this isn't in the UK, this is in the US, but this in the US where the majority, most, more people take antidepressants than any other country in the world. The US, if they have an FDA black box warning for under 25s regarding the efficacy of the drugs and the risk of suicidality in young adults in under 25s. So if we look at research that has been done, and there is some very good research in my book, there's an alarming link between rising rates of suicide and antidepressant prescribing, especially amongst young people. So the use of antidepressants by people under 25s or people experiencing depression is associated with double the risk of suicidal thoughts or behavior. So, it's one thing that we don't hear about because nobody wants to speak about it. It's the one thing that we can't obviously ask someone after when they've gone, but we need to start asking the question, was there a link? Was this person taking or stopping or starting an antidepressant, and did that lead to their suicidal thoughts? The black box warning is firmly rooted in solid data. So an attempt to claim that the warning has caused harm or, that's based on quite weak evidence, really.
I've had friends that they've experienced something similar where they've revealed to me just how much of a dark place they've been in. And I've tried to listen, and having read your book and learnt more about this, I do often ask, have you still been taking your medication? And I find it alarming that, and I'm one person with a small sample size, so I can't speak scientifically, but from my own experience, I find it alarming that when they've had their darkest thoughts, they've forgotten to take them or they intentionally hadn't taken them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that I always talk about when I talk about this subject is that there is an amazing website in the UK called Antidep Aware. And it has, I think now about 8,000 case studies or experience, stories of people who, and most of them young people, who have taken antidepressants and who have ended their life. And these are coroner's reports where antidepressants are spoken about in relation to someone's death. And we need more research. We definitely need to know what is happening and what might be leading to these suicides.
Do we have any clue as to what it is about antidepressants that can lead to these suicides?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said before. They don't actually cure an imbalance, they create one. So when they're creating an imbalance, as I said before, that can be a physical imbalance or it can be a mental imbalance. But there is one thing that is becoming quite apparent, that many people who become suicidal when they're taking, regarding antidepressants, they're suffering from a condition called akathisia.
I mean, akathisia isn't a word well, it's not a common word really, is it? What is akathisia?
So, as I said, these drugs create many changes, and their mental changes or their physical changes. And I call it akathisia the A word of antidepressant adverse effects, because it's probably the one that everybody needs to understand, and especially if they or someone they know is taking an antidepressant, because akathisia can actually happen to anybody who is taking an antidepressant. So it's a medication-induced state. So it can happen when patients start, stop, change dose or change a generic of a drug. And not just antidepressants, lots of medication can cause akathisia. So how do I describe akathisia? So people kind of call it the epitome of losing your mind. You know, we often say, I think I've lost my mind.
Yeah, I say that quite a lot.
Yeah. Well, people generally have no control over their mind. And the suicide comes in two ways. The first is that akathisia can cause relentless, intrusive thoughts of suicide. People have thoughts where voices inside their head, these voices are actually telling them to kill themselves, and they have no control, none whatsoever. And eventually they have to give in. They have no option to give in to these powerful voices. So the second way is that the symptoms of akathisia, so the physical restlessness, the jerking, the psychological symptoms, become so unbearable with or without the suicidal thoughts, that people find they have no option other to end their lives because it has become so intolerable. You know, it's something that I'm very passionate about speaking about more, and it's something that we really need to understand. And it's often confused with psychosis, especially first episode psychosis, because many people have been diagnosed with psychosis when actually they are suffering from drug-induced akathisia.
Why don't we know more about this? I certainly didn't know about it before reading your book.
Because it's being withheld. Charities don't speak about it because it's a pharmaceutical drug-induced state, and we have to remember that many organizations who speak about suicide, they have vested interests, and much of their funding comes from the pharmaceutical industry. So without getting political or pharma bashing, yeah, it's a complicated issue.
I know we said this at the start, and I want to just emphasize saying this again. This isn't a given, and don't just stop taking your medication. Like, I know if I was listening to this and I heard that, I'd be like, wow, and I know we said it before, and I'm going to say it again, that we need to add an emphasis of not to just suddenly stop.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is one of the things that needs to be emphasized when it comes to, we might have the umbrella study that came out recently the information in it wasn't really new, but it was made, it was made public, and it was in a very loud way. And one of the things that we have to realize is that it's not just about a chemical imbalance. It's not just about serotonin. It's about, if you have taken these drugs for a considerable length of time, you are probably dependent on them. You should never, ever stop taking antidepressants or any medication without consulting your GP or psychiatrist. Many people can go into incredible withdrawal, which can actually be life-threatening if they choose to try and manage that themselves.
Why do some people try to choose to manage it themselves? What might lead you to think, I'm just going to stop taking my medication for a bit?
Well, I suppose that, the more awareness we have about these drugs and the harm that these drugs can cause, then the more people might think, are these drugs really doing me any good? And am I benefiting from taking these drugs? So they might make that decision to stop taking them. But this cannot happen. People really need medical advice. Antidepressant dependence is a really, really serious issue. So when I talked about balance before, when you take antidepressants, you have become in a new balanced state. Once you stop taking them, you become unbalanced very quickly, and that imbalance or imbalance can very quickly lead to some major mental and physical consequences.
Well, I think I was only on them for 4 months, and when I came off them, I experienced the brain zaps. That was weird.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like, I don't know how to explain it. It was literally like a sudden electric shock that would come up top of my head and go over my body.
Yeah.
That was weird when I was coming off them, but I think that was relatively mild. As you mentioned, what was it? Half of the people that take them will experience some form of withdrawal, you said.
Yeah, and I think it's probably more than half, but yeah, studies tell us that it's at least half of the people. And people don't realize how difficult it, I go back to, we hear many people on TV or in the public saying that antidepressants saved my life. Well, they might have saved their life in that they might be in a better place than they were when they started taking them, but at a cost, because these people are dependent probably on these drugs. And if they ever want to stop taking them, it's going to be very difficult.
That's not necessarily everyone, is it? I suppose what you're talking about, people has been taken for a long time.
It's such a unique thing to every individual. So there are people who have only taken them for months, who can have very severe withdrawal effects. It really depends on the drug. It depends on the dosage. It depends on the individual. So there is really no way of knowing how you will react to these drugs when you try to stop taking them.
You mentioned changing dosage and medication. What do people need to be aware of if they find themselves in a situation like me with my GP, where she just kept increasing it? That was the only option I really had.
I think it's really important, especially with young people, if their dose is suddenly upped or if they take less of a medication, they have to be monitored, and they monitored for, the first few weeks at least of that change, because as I said before, this is a time when imbalances can occur, and there can be some incredibly serious psychological and physiological adverse effects. For many people, they can up the dose or change the dose, and there might not be significant effects, but for many people there are, and that's why we need to be aware when we change dose.
And to make sure you've got a GP that understands, that's well informed, and to follow them and make sure they're aware of it,
Yeah. absolutely. And that's one of the the main problems that we have is finding a GP. We don't all have GPs who really understand the issue. And finding one who does is really, you know, that can be life-saving.
I suppose that ties into what we were saying earlier about the side effect, or the adverse effects. I've heard of people taking mini breaks from them because the sexual dysfunction, for example, it might be going away. I'm guessing that would say that what you've just said there would be like that'd be a really bad idea, or could be a bad idea.
Yeah. I think that what we have to take into account with these drugs is that if you start to take a drug, or if you stop taking a drug, or if you reduce a drug, and you have significant adverse effects, it has to be the drug's fault until proven otherwise. And we have to start accepting that.
So ultimately, if you've started taking an antidepressant and you notice something change,
You go back to your GP.
and basically from your saying, until you have evidence that it's not the antidepressant, assume that it is.
Yes.
It's all really scary. It is scary stuff. And say I was fortunate, I see myself as being fortunate that I came off after 4 months without, besides the brain zaps, without many problems. And I see myself as being lucky. What do we know about the long-term impacts of antidepressants?
Yeah, that's unfortunately the one thing that we don't know, because there has been very little research on the long-term effects of antidepressants. If you think about it, the pharmaceutical industry do trials that last, 6 months, maybe a couple of years at most, but many people have been on SSRI antidepressants since Prozac was introduced in the late 80s. And nobody does 30-year trials to find out, what the long-term effects are. We are just about starting to be aware of some of the long-term effects. But again, this is an area where we need independent research, which is not pharmaceutical funded research. And most of what we know, most of the evidence we have in all aspects of, taking antidepressants is from anecdotal evidence. It's from the experiences of people who have taken them or are taking them, that we understand the real effects these drugs are having.
You mentioned something there. I really hope, and I keep saying in every episode, that I hope there's people listening to this because someone they care about, they want to support, and they want to understand. What's an SSRI if it's someone that's not really aware of it? What's an SSRI antidepressant versus another type?
So an SSRI, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, is the most common antidepressant that we're probably going to be prescribed if we go to see. It's the most up-to-date antidepressant that we have. And this is the one that is supposedly curing our chemical imbalance that we've been told that we have. So, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and what it does, it transports messages between the neurons in our brain. And we have been told that we have this chemical imbalance. And what we're told is that these drugs increase by blocking the reuptake of serotonin. So they increase the levels, but actually they really don't increase the levels. What they do at best is probably makes more serotonin available in the synapses.
But we don't really know how they work, from if I remember right at the start. So
No, we don't.
what I wish my GP had said to me now, knowing what I know now, and I really hope she's changed what she's saying, is it's not that you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. We have this medication, we don't know how it works, and we don't know what the long-term impacts are. It's a very different conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. And the brain, is the most complex organ in our body. I was talking about it sending messages between neurons. If we think about it, we have 100 billion neurons in our brain. And we know so little about the brain. And, to really be given the story that is such a simplistic one as, they increase serotonin in our brain, is one that's not based on scientific evidence.
And I think it's hard because I know what I felt like when I've been in a really bad place and I'm listening to podcasts. I mean, this isn't going to be easy listening. And I get there's a lot of scared people, or people that probably will listen to this and feel quite scared, especially if they're taking an antidepressant at the minute. If I were taking an antidepressant and I'm hearing this and I'm starting to question, what could I do?
Okay. First of all, do nothing. Remain balanced. If you are balanced, remain there, stay there for the time being. Inform yourself about these drugs. Learn as much as you can. If you have a GP who doesn't understand these drugs, then please help them understand the reality of these drugs. And if you feel that you might eventually be in a position where you might want to reduce your medication, it's never about taking or not taking. It's about being able to manage these drugs. So if you feel that you might be able to use what we call a harm reduction approach and manage your use of these drugs, then you can do that. But it has to be with the support of either a GP or somebody who's qualified to help you do this.
Yeah, and so what you said there, you don't want to almost be accused of scaremongering. Some people do get off them too, don't they? It's not that this is guaranteed. I took them for 4 months and I got off them and I had a difficult experience. I'm all right now, but
yeah, people do get off them, but the best thing that a young person can do is taking into account what we talked about in terms of life situations and life being fast moving. And I think what the best advice that I can probably give, and this is not medical advice, this is just general advice, is that if you choose to take an antidepressant, take it at the lowest dose and take it for the shortest time possible.
I just think we don't know how they work. We weren't told about the adverse effects of these things. It just becomes such a different decision. Making that informed decision. I know you talk about being informed all the time, and it's something that the whole reason I'm doing this podcast, and it's the whole theme of things I wish I'd have known at the start. And I hope that this does help inform people. But also, I think that it's important to say, like, challenge yours, become informed, like, make your own mind up. We're not sat here telling you what to do. They're available. And if you think it's the right decision for you and you become informed and you know all of this and you know what you're suffering with at that time, it's your own decision. We're not telling you how to live your life. But this message is, again, it's the stuff I didn't know at the start.
Yeah, I mean, we do, I often talk about this, we do 3 billion Google searches a day. If you want to find the information about the reality of these drugs, it is out there. You can go online and find out the experiences of others. You can go on and make an informed choice about these drugs. There are very good books, just mine, sorry to say it. But there are very good books that have been written about this subject, which are easy to understand, which are accessible. This is a really important decision, and it's not one that should be taken without being informed.
Yeah, and you're right. There is a lot of information out there, and we'll put some more links in the bio. But I do think you have to also be careful where you're looking, because I found some of the organisations we trust the most have some information that is, again, what the latest research says.
Absolutely. And I think, it is important that you get your information from trusted resources. And be very careful of although information can be found on the internet, again, be very careful where you find it.
And challenge, I just think challenge everything, become informed. I always say that I had to become a bit of a detective at the start, and I hope this means that people don't have to do as much research and digging around as I had to. But challenge us. I'm absolutely fine with that. Challenge what we say, but make sure that you have the information you need to make a decision. The questions in your book, I think, are a really good way to qualify if you've got a good GP that's informed, especially with some of the difficult areas we spoke about. If you were considering coming off them or changing medication, I think it's really important that you know and you have that good relationship and you trust your GP.
Yeah, I mean, it's your right to know, to have the information, and your right to be informed. And just with every other area of medicine or medical treatment, you have you have the right to to give informed consent to take these drugs. So you need to ask questions.
I can't say that enough. Question. And I've got a copy of the book here, which I've read, and I wish I had this book. I think it's amazing. I really do. This book would have saved me so much suffering, and answered so many questions. It's really well written, really understandable, and it has everything that I'd have needed to know to make a decision in it. So if you are struggling, I'll put a link to your book on your websites and whatnot in the bio. But if you're struggling, you don't know where to go to make a decision. I mentioned this previously. I emailed one of the biggest mental health charities in the UK saying, everyone's telling me I've got chemical imbalance. My GP's pushing me through. It doesn't seem right. Called them. They ignored me. But if I'd had your book, I'd have had the answers easily accessible. So if you're going through it, if you're supporting someone that's struggling, I'd really recommend reading it.
Thank you.
No, but thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to write the book, for condensing 12 years of research into something understandable.
Thank you very much for talking with me, and I really enjoyed it.
Before we finish, I want to be very, very clear that we're not suggesting that anyone should stop taking their antidepressants. As you've heard, they're serious drugs. And whilst it's really important that we become informed, it's equally important that we don't make any changes without the support of a doctor. I've included a link to Beverly's book in the show notes if you want to find out more. Well, now you've made it to the end, so you're basically part of our community, and I need your help. I've paid for the whole of season 1 myself, and if I'm being honest, I'm running on fumes now. I'm trying to raise £1,200 to cover the cost of season 2. Every penny will go towards creating episodes that help people who are feeling lost and alone. If you found this episode helpful and you're able to chip in, then please do help us help others. You can donate to season 2 by heading to my Ko-fi page, which you can see in the show notes. And if you're in London and you want to join the Reconnect waiting list, go to reconnect.club, or if you'd like me to speak at your organisation, it's joetudor.com. Thank you for helping me grow the Reconnect community. Until next time, see ya.